Yeah, I may have it. I should probably go in and look and see if I do.
It's in Tracy's monthly email reminder, but Tracy, I think a reminder goes out a few days before and lets people know that not to forget about it and also to make sure that they're registered.
I took a screenshot, so I'll go in and make sure that I'm on those.
Okay, everyone. So we are recording now, and Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for inviting me to this. I'm very excited to be here. I grew up with an architect father who did a lot of projects in Northwest Iowa, which is where he spent his career, doing a lot of historic preservation work with Main Streets. So I got to grow up with Main Streets, and so getting to talk about oral histories, which I've been doing almost my whole life. I think I always say I sat in on my first one when I was 5. My mom was collecting stories from my great aunt, and recorded my first one at the age of 12 on a cassette. So getting to combine those two things, I'm really excited about. So I really appreciate getting to be here today with all of you. So let's start off at the beginning and get all on the same page about what is an oral history. An oral history is a recorded conversation between two people, one of whom does most of the talking and the other of whom is the collector or does most of the listening. Oral histories come out of storytelling, which is communicating history and traditions and culture from one generation to the next. This is the dominant form of history for almost all people in all history. We've started, we have more of a modern version of this with the oral history, in that it's recorded on some sort of media. And we, instead of calling the people who are telling their stories interviewees, we've started using the term narrator. And that's because we want people to narrate their own stories. We don't want to approach it like a journalism interview where it's question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. We really like people to direct the direction of their story, to tell their story in the way they want to tell it. So why would oral histories be useful to your project? Well, in general, we're going to get specific, I promise, but in general, oral histories are really great because they tell the story from an insider's point of view. These are sometimes stories that are hard to find anywhere else, because really what oral histories do is they can talk about an individual's memories, their personal perspectives. People often share private moments, feelings, emotions, told in their own words with their own voices. Oral histories are an amazing way to build relationships between people. And that's where I think that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go along, but this is where I think that, like, for Main Street projects, this is a really great thing, because what you're doing is, by having collectors and narrators, you're bringing people together to that have a shared interest in your Main Street, in your communities. They also often give older generations a voice to talk to upcoming generations, for upcoming generations to share their hopes and dreams of what their future will look like. And they can really join people together across time, because an oral history, once recorded, you can listen to even after the person who left the story is gone. So you're saying, oh, wow, that all sounds great, Rachel. How do I get started with a project? Well, first of all, get those partnerships in place. Especially if you want to do a larger project, go to places that may already have oral histories or may be interested in preserving the oral histories. Places like your local libraries, your local historical or genealogical societies, your local museum. They may actually wish to bring in the oral histories that you collect into their collections. They may also actually already have processes in place for collecting, which means you wouldn't have to start your project from scratch. Even if they don't have those things in place, we're going to give you the tools today to do it. But larger projects are really great, again, to bring everybody together. And so you definitely want to crowdsource the collecting, and bringing all those people together can also help increase enthusiasm for the project, and may also be organizationally tight enough to be able to apply for funding. The State Historic Fund does a lot of funding for these kind of projects. So that's something that may be, something you may be interested in as well. Okay, so so once you have your team together, your team that's going to run this project, the first thing is to kind of sit down and just brainstorm what kind of stories you want to capture. This may include transformations over time. It may of the birth, evolution of annual events, traditions, and organizational structures, relationships between neighbors, relationships between neighbors and the greater community, how people participate in traditions and what those traditions mean to participants, significant economic and social changes to the community, annual events. I mean, there's really, it's really what stories you want to capture for your community. The next step is to determine where and how you're going to collect. And we're going to talk about both of these types of collections more deeply, but it's a really important project, or it's a really important question to know before you fully develop your project, because the answers to these questions will determine the numbers and types of questions, as well as the depth of the answers you're going to get. So we are going to get into both of these in a little bit, but just to get started, I just want to introduce you to snowball collecting and storytelling collecting. Snowball collecting would include easy to answer questions, lots of narrators, and high traffic public locations, like say a booth at a community event. Storytelling collecting is more one-on-one. More thought-provoking questions, way fewer narrators because they take a lot more time, and low or no traffic or private locations. So we will come back to that, but the big thing is once we get to all that information, you'll have all that information and you'll know how to answer this question at the start of your project rather than thinking about it later on. But before we get to that, we need to talk about what types of questions. So once we know if we're going to do a little high volume event, or if we're going to do kind of a big low volume event, then we start thinking about our question types, because not all questions are appropriate for high volume, quick events or slow events. So we've got basically 4 different types of questions. The first 2 I'm sure you're very familiar with back from 4th or 5th grade, whenever we learned to ask those questions. Or if you're a parent and you know about sitting down at the dinner table and asking your kids questions about their day. The first type are closed-ended questions. These are primarily who, what, or when questions that can be answered with yes, no, a date, a word, a phrase. Something like, what is your favorite Main Street business? What is your favorite Main Street activity or event, right? It's a pretty straightforward, oh, I love the hardware store, or, I get to go in and like look at all of the different nuts and bolts or whatever. This is a great snowball starter question for high volume events. These are also great questions for getting your storytelling or longer slow events collections rolling, because it gets people just kind of comfortable with answering questions. The next type of questions are open-ended questions. These are the kind of questions that require additional information. These are more of our who, what, or when questions. They require a little bit of additional information to answer, but they're primarily informational. So something like, what is your favorite part of doing business on Main Street? Or what is your favorite memory of Main Street? These are also great snowball and storytelling questions. The next 2 types of questions are not so great for high volume events, but they're really great if you're sitting down with an individual narrator for a longer oral history. This is where kind of the meat of oral history questions really come in, because these are the parts where we're asking them questions that aren't readily available elsewhere. The first kind of questions are retrospective questions. These are questions that require the narrator to tap into emotional memories. Questions like, how do you best remember Main Street? Or why do you continue to shop and do business on Main Street? The final type of question we have are what I call connecting questions. These are questions where we're requiring the narrator to connect their past to their present. So for example, if during the retrospective questions, they talk about how when they were a kid, the whole family would get kind of dressed up and they would go down to Main Street on a Saturday night. And, you know, the teenagers would go off and watch a movie, and the mom would do window shopping with the younger kids, and dad would go off and do his thing. So, and then they'd all come back together as a family for dinner. So if that was a great memory that they had, and they tell you a story about that, with the connecting, maybe you say, what Main Street traditions were your favorite and why do you continue to attend them? Or you loved doing this as a young person. Do you continue to do this with your family, and why? Those intergenerational questions that create that continuity of time in your location are really great. These connecting questions are really great for that. The next thing we want to ask is, whose stories do we want to collect? Well, I mean, people who work or have worked on Main Street, people who shop or do business on Main Street. A couple of special things I like to call out. First of all, don't preclude young people in your collection. You'd be surprised how many young people already have memories of Main Street or things that they like to do. And you also really, for me personally, as someone who started really collecting very young, having youth involved is a really important part of making sure that continuity of the past continues into the future. Right? You get them interested and excited about Main Street now, they get invested in the community, and it helps that continuity into the future. You also want to keep a special eye out for those people in town who seem to know everything about its history. You know, you want to talk to them. Not only will they have great stories, but they also will definitely know people that you should talk to. And then also those people who have great stories that you always hear them tell, and you're like, I love that story that so-and-so tells, but it's never been recorded. And you want that collected because you want that to be part of the story. So another reason why you need to consider if you're going to do a high volume event or a low and slow event is because at some point you're going to need to recruit people to collect the stories. So either event, which we're coming up on next year, either event you're going to need people to collect for you. And so the first thing is before you choose a date, make sure the people who are volunteering to collect are available on that date. You know, if everybody in your town leaves town for Memorial Day, doing a Memorial Day event is probably not the best idea. So make sure that those people who have volunteered are available. The best way to ensure you have enough people to help is to, number one, make sure you have that date. You know, everyone agrees on that date. Number two, make sure you are very clear that you are going to provide training for the people who want to help. People get very excited about wanting to help with projects like these, but they very often back out because they are concerned that they're not going to know how to do it. So make sure that you're very clear that you're going to provide full training. They don't need to have any experience other than a listening ear to come in and collect the stories. You also don't want to forget your town youth or youth connected to your Main Street in some way. Again, getting them involved is great for that moving forward, but also they make good collectors. Most high schools now require students to volunteer some hours in their community before graduation. So this is a really great concrete project that they can do. You may even advertise through the high school guidance counselor or something like that to find youth that would be interested in getting those hours in. Okay, so let's talk about our two different kinds of events. The first kind of collecting event is the snowball collecting event. Snowball collecting events are high volume. You can do it if you have like an office or something like that, or a storefront on Main Street. You could do it there. But snowball events also are also great at like town festivals and stuff like that, right? If there's a booth area in a town event that you're doing, set up a booth. The collection is semi-private space, and it's really only to protect audio quality. And this can be done as simply as like 3 tarps, put up with PVC or with a tent, so that you have an enclosed space to make sure that your audio quality isn't too bouncy from all the ambient noise. Most of these would be unscheduled. People can stop in and share their story. I normally limit questions to closed and open-ended questions and no more than 3. And so for length, the amount of time that any narrator would be giving would be, anywhere between 1 to 5 minutes. They're really quick, which is why these snowballs. You'll end up collecting oral histories and release forms. And then if the narrator wishes to provide follow-up contact information, they can do that. So our snowball timeline looks something like this. We prepare our 1 to 3 questions. We create flyers to publicize the event. I normally will include those questions on the flyer. You want to make sure that they know where you're located so they can stop by, that they don't need an appointment, and include the questions so people can get excited about answering them. They're like, oh, I really want to answer that question. I've got to stop by the booth, right? So those questions. You want to make sure your collectors are trained on the recording technology and on the paperwork. Paperwork's very straightforward. We're going to talk about that on the next slide. I also like to prep a question board, one of those, big tablets. You just write your questions out in big Sharpie, so you have those on your booth, or you can print a sign if you want to get fancier with those questions, so that you have those on the booth, so that if someone didn't see the flyer and they're walking past, they can still see the questions. You're like, oh, those are great. That's cool. I want to stop in and do it. You print your release forms. You create and print a spreadsheet for tracking. And let me show you the paperwork here. So again, on the flyer, where you'll be located, what times you'll be collecting. I always say, like, you can include the questions. I always say, just put the questions on there. It gets people excited about stopping by. And then finally, letting people know how you're going to use the oral histories. So the spreadsheet, real straightforward, pre-numbered on a clipboard. Every single one of your audio files needs to be a separate number. So, pre-insert your numbers there on your spreadsheet. Then you can just write down the name of the participant, make sure they sign your release form. And then finally, if they wish to provide an email address for follow-up, they can do that as well. So snowball event, high volume, quick turnover, different from our storytelling collecting event. With storytelling collecting, this is probably the slow cooker version, right, of collecting oral histories. You're going to want a location that has individual rooms. If your organization does not have a facility like that for individual private collection, you may want to talk to a local house of worship, a local lodge, something like that, that might have individual private rooms, because you need one-on-one private space. You don't have to schedule them, but I really strongly suggest you do, because people might want to talk for an hour, and if you get there and all of the collectors are busy with narrators, you might end up waiting an hour. So I always recommend scheduling on these kind of events. Questions, all of the different types of questions we talked about are great. They can be sent ahead of time if scheduled. So if you've got specific questions that you'd like to hear your narrator talk about, sending them ahead of time so they can just start thinking about it is particularly useful. And then length can, honestly, oral histories, I've collected oral histories that have gone on for 3 hours. If you're scheduling them, I would say, an hour, right? You do 1 hour blocks. And then if you get to the end of the hour and someone says, oh, I would love, I've got more stories to share, you can say, we will follow up with you. We will, let's come back and do this again, but we need to get on to our next person. And then finally, materials collected, same as the first. You're going to collect your audio or your audio visual, depending on what you're using for technology of your oral history, and then also your release form. This may also be an event where you would want to collect photos, documents, or artifacts that relate to your collection project. You would have to instruct people ahead of time how to do that. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so for your storytelling timeline, you're going to prepare 8 to 12 questions of all 4 varieties. Decide if you're going to do scheduled collecting. I highly recommend it. And in that case, you may wish to send the questions to the person ahead of time. Again, flyers to publicize the event. Again, training collectors on the technology and on narrator care, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And then also on paperwork. You'll also want to make sure you have those quiet collecting areas reserved so the narrators have privacy, whether that's classrooms or meeting rooms, things like that. Print your release forms, and then finally create and print your spreadsheet. Now, again, with the flyers, same kind of information. Although they may be able to bring something if you decide to do photos or other documents. We'll talk about that on the next slide. With the spreadsheets, this is just a little bit different than the booth for the storyteller or for the snowball event, because in the booth, you can just have a single spreadsheet that has your numbers 1 through 100 or whatever, and just a single clipboard. But with your storytelling, you're going to have separate rooms, but you also want to make sure that your rooms don't have all the same numbers for your audio files, because otherwise you'll have an interview 1 in all 4 rooms. And then it's like 1, 1, 1, 1. You're like, which one is which? So you'll want to make sure that each room has its own set of numbers, 1 through 10, 11 through 20, and so on. And then you'll have, again, the name of the participant, the release was signed. And then if you decide to do document collection, a column for whether they brought things that day, because then you can match up those numbers from spreadsheets. Okay, so I will only briefly mention here that you may wish to collect photos or other documents from your narrators. Maybe they have maybe people have really great photographs of like Main Street from the 1950s or something like that, that you might want to collect. In that case, you have to do kind of a whole separate setup. You'll need portable scanners or photocopiers with scan functions. You'll need computers or laptops, jump drives, some place to save them, things like that. If you decide to do photos and document collecting on that same day, make sure your spreadsheet cross-references the oral histories. So if someone comes in and they've got 4 photographs and 2 documents that you're going to scan, make sure that number on your spreadsheet lines up with their oral history number. So you'll need a way to communicate that between your file collector people and your oral history collection people. You basically want 2 separate units doing that. And then with photographs, here at History Colorado, we don't take photographs unless we can identify all the people in them. And that's because there are just so many photographs in the world. And if we don't know who's in them or why the photo was taken or what the story is behind the picture, all we have is a really cool photograph that we don't know anything about. So it's totally up to you how you wish to collect photographs. I'm just letting you know that at History Colorado, we like to know the story behind that photograph. Okay, so let's get back to the oral history. I can talk more about that if people have questions about it, but let's get back to the oral history part. Recording technologies. You do not need super fancy recording technology to do these projects. 40 years ago, everybody was doing stuff on open reel-to-reel recording. As someone who has spent a lot of time digitizing that material on that was on reel-to-reel, the audio is awful. Like it was never it worked better than nothing, but like the medium was not a great medium. Today, we can do lots of stuff with our phones. If you're going to have 4 collectors in 4 different rooms, you're not going to buy 4 video cameras or 4 pieces of recording equipment. I did more than 100 oral histories for my dissertation, and I just did them all on my phone. So really, it's the oral history. The way that oral histories work is that it's the person telling the story in their own voice being recorded, not the quality of the medium that you, or the quality of the recording technology you use. That being said, you want to be able to hear them, right? Which is why if you are doing a snowball booth, you want to make sure that you've got some tarps or something that kind of contains the sound in that recording area. So video cameras, smartphone videos or smartphone audio, voice recorder apps, handheld recorders, really whatever technology you have, you just want to make sure that your collectors are trained on it and practice. So whichever technology you use, you want your collectors to be 100% comfortable with the technology, which is why using their own cell phones is not the worst way to go. And you also just want to make sure they've practiced, which honestly for most people means that they have to go practice. You have to send them out to practice with, you know, talking to their spouse or talking to their kid or talking to their friend or whatever, and have them, you know, record that conversation so they can get comfortable doing it. And to be fair, I've collected hundreds of oral histories and I always get a little nervous before I do it because I want to do well. I want to do well for the person who's going to be sharing their story. So I always get a little bit nervous, but having that training and practice really, really important so that those people will 100% commit to being a collector for you. So regardless of snowball or storytelling, first things first, you want to make sure that you get that person's information on the spreadsheet and that they've signed the release form. Tracy, I can send out the slides to you, and then I can also send a couple of sample release forms so that people can have some samples to go off of for putting these together. And then once you've got that information on your paper, then you either usher them into the booth or you're already sitting down in a private room with them. You press record, and I always leave a 1 to 2 second pause at the beginning before I start talking. And the reason we do that is because if we need to edit out ambient background sound, we need a gauge to be able to know what that ambient background sound sounds like. And I'll talk to you in a second about, or a little bit later about how to do some simple editing. So we press record, 1 to 2 second pause, and then the collector says the date, their name, their location, and the narrator's first and last name. Now, after these are done, both in the snowball and the storytelling, for snowball collection, it's real straightforward. You've got those questions in the booth. You ask the narrator to respond to 1 or more questions from the board while you're recording. They respond to their questions. You say thank you. They say thank you. You end the recording. Your snowball is done. Little bit more depth for your one-on-one collecting. And with storytelling collecting, we need to consider, we need to do a bit more training with our collectors, because collecting a one-on-one oral history is different than a snowball event. Whether they got the questions ahead of time or not, you really, really need to make sure as a collector that you are providing the narrator with physical, mental, and emotional space. Collecting memories takes time. Most of us don't remember what we had for breakfast on last Friday, let alone asking somebody to travel in their mind all the way back to 1964, their senior year in high school, and tell you a story about them going to Main Street with their friends. So you're asking people to travel back in time in their minds, and sometimes it's going to take a little while, even if they saw the questions ahead of time. I 100% guarantee you that if they do not know, if they are not able to answer your question, they'll just tell you. So you don't, you just be comfortable with the long pauses, because if they don't know, they will tell you they don't know, or if they can't answer, or if they don't want to answer, they will tell you that. They will let you know when they're ready to move on. So you don't have to be worried that like nobody in class is going to raise their hand and answer the question, and just hope that somebody does, right? They're going to let you know either by telling you that memory or by saying, you know, I don't remember, or I don't want to talk about that. And then you can move on. This is not the time for disagreement, for taking offense, for correcting inaccuracies or mispronunciations, for passing judgment, offering criticism, or interpreting their story. The collector is there to collect. We're basically there to push the button and give them somebody to talk to. So you really want to watch your body language. Having quietness of both words and body language is important. This is true. I can even show you this on Zoom because you'll be able to see it. So, so I do what I call so sometimes people will say things that you agree with and you get excited about them. Or sometimes they'll say something that you really don't agree with at all. You don't want to be like, yeah, cool, right? When they just told you that, like, I don't know, their grandpa enjoyed being in the Klan or something. So I do what I call the neutral head bob, because people need to know you're hearing them. So you don't need to tell them that you agree with them or disagree with them. We don't want to do that here. It's their story. But what you want to do is you want to let them know, I hear you. So I do kind of a little bit of a head tilt, because for some reason, I don't know all the psychology behind it, but basically there's something where you tilt your head and it lets people know your ear is toward them and that you're hearing them. So do kind of a little bit of a head tilt and just kind of this. The neutral head bob, right? My head's just kind of bobbing. I'm hearing them. I'm understanding the words that are coming in. I hear what they're saying, but I'm not like actively agreeing with them or frowning, right? Like you get the frown, you know, like I'm like, oh, I don't agree with that at all, right? And then with body language, you want to make sure that you are neutral in body language too. I'm currently sitting with my arms at either side, but if I sit like this, my arms crossed, you can't see it on camera, although you'd be able to see it in person, but you can see my shoulders come up, right? So I'm in a relaxed pose here. I'm in a slightly defensive pose here, right? That my shoulders come up. So you want to just kind of maintain your physical neutrality as well as your neutrality of words and facial expressions, because this is their story. This is their time to say what they want to say. It's their story. So these are important things to make sure you train your collectors if you're doing a storytelling event. Also for storytelling, in addition to your quiet space, you want to make sure you have things like a box of tissues, bottle or glass of water, because your narrator is going to be talking a lot. And you also want to make sure your narrator is 12 to 18 inches from the recording device. It's really important that the audio collects them. It's less important that the audio collects the person who's collecting the story. We had a curator in the early 1990s here at History Colorado who would put the microphone, he did all his on cassette tapes. He would put the microphone right in front of him. So you'd hear him say, "Hi, this is Stan Honor and I'm blah, blah." And then the person who's telling their story, quiet, and then right? We care less about what the collector has to say, right? Yes, it's great that we can hear the questions. We want to be able to hear the questions, but it's more important for us to capture the audio of the narrator. This also is why you have a quiet space. It's also why you don't put your chairs 12 feet apart from each other, right? You're not going to sit knee to knee, but you're going to sit close enough that the audio collecting device will collect both. Again, practicing with the space, doing a collector training ahead of time and having them practice with each other, both doing the active listening that we just talked about and doing the technology recording is a really good idea. Okay, so once we have collected our oral histories, we now have all this audio material. We got to figure out what to do with it. So before you share it out into the world, you're going to have some administrative tasks to complete. First of all, whatever you do, make sure you back it up. A computer is fine for a primary location, but it should be backed up to an external hard drive, to a thumb and a jump drive, burn it to a CD, although that's kind of an antiquated technology at this point. Put it on the cloud, put it in Dropbox, put it in Google folders, whatever. Make sure you have it in multiple locations. We really want to make sure that these things are backed up. They're only digital, so if they're gone, they're gone. We really want them backed up in multiple locations. I recommend 3. We also want to have some sort of spreadsheet or database that will like combine all of your oral histories into one document. I call it cataloging. This is as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. Like if you have a fancier data management system, software apps for your paid, that's great. But this can be just as simple as an Excel spreadsheet with your audio file name on it, along with the things with what you collected at your collecting events. And then finally, you might want to index or transcribe your oral histories. Indexing is kind of a table of contents. It's a quicker version of talking about what's in each one. So for example, maybe Jim Doe talks about joining the local church at 3:15, at 3 minutes and 15 seconds, becoming a church elder at 5 minutes and 42 seconds, and then his favorite memory of the town's picnic that the church always hosted at 10 minutes and 28 seconds. So it's kind of a table of contents hitting on Jim Doe's big events that he talks about. Transcription is also available. There is now AI transcription services available online, things like Trint or Otter AI that you have to pay for. You can put your audio file in there and it will provide a transcript. It's still in beta. All of this stuff is still in beta. So just like, you know, when you have your captions on at the bottom of Zoom or whatever, it's not going to be perfect, right? But at least it will give you a fully printed document of what you're doing. Okay, so the first thing you want to do now you're ready to share is you want to make sure your narrator gets their copy first. Particularly if it's a one-on-one oral history. And then also if you did photo and document scanning as part of your storytelling collecting day, you may be putting together a book. One of the things that is just a little bit off, I talk about this a lot in family oral histories, is everyone makes these Shutterfly books now, and other kind of services like Shutterfly, where you do a book of your family photos from an event or your year in review or whatever. And one of the things that I highly recommend is putting in QR codes with audio material. You can put a QR code into a Shutterfly book or into some other kind of book, any kind of book you want, really. And the QR code, when you scan it, will take you to an audio file. My brother, I recommended this to my brother. My nephew just turned 2, and they're putting together a book of his last year, his most recent year. And I said to my brother, I was like, you got it. He's starting to say words and things. And I was like, you got to do a little audio clip of him. And so what they did was they did some audio of him, put the QR code in the book. And now when he's 25, they're going to be able to scan that QR code and be able to hear him talking at the age of 2. So QR codes are a really great way to incorporate audio into things that have been historically primarily visual. And so I highly recommend that. In fact, if you scan the QR code that's on the screen right now, it's going to take you to one of our digitized oral histories here at History Colorado. Also, putting things on SoundCloud, which is audio only, or YouTube, which can be audio, but is primarily video. You may want to share that. Tracy showed me a really cool website that has Main Street things on it. You may want to attach them there. So there's really a lot of ways to share these back into the community for people to be able to hear either full oral histories, especially if they're the longer ones, or clips of those full oral histories, or full snowball oral histories. So there's a lot of ways to be able to share these back. These are just a few. Okay. I promised I would leave plenty of time to leave it open for questions, and because I want to hear what you are interested in. So I'm going to close with what I really love about oral histories. For me, oral histories are a really valuable primary source, but they're really an amazing way to connect to other people and to learn about who other people are and to build community. Recently, I found an oral history in our collection that had not been put into our catalog. And so when that happens, it's like, we're not exactly sure how it came to us. And so I don't know if we have permission to have it or not. So this was an oral history that was collected in the late 90s with a woman named Ursula Atkins. And I tracked her down, I found her obituary. And so I found in her obituary the name of her relative. She had a husband and 2 daughters. Went to find the husband because he would be next of kin. He had also passed away. The older daughter had passed away, but I found who I thought was the younger daughter in Alabama. And so I found a phone number for her by Googling around, and I called the phone number and I said, I don't even know if I'm reaching the right person, but if your mom's name was Ursula Atkins, I'm Rachel Storm at the Colorado Historical Society, and we have an oral history of hers, and I'd love to connect with you about it. And I heard back from her. It was her mom. And so I had digitized the file and I sent it to her. And I said, you know, we'd love for you to donate it to us if you're interested. And her mom had worked for the Denver Public Schools in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And so I heard back from her. And she said, I would love to donate this. She said, I thank you so much because my mom died in 2000 and I haven't heard her voice since then. So it was amazing to me to get to hear my mom talk. She said, not only that, my daughter, who just started college a year ago, had not met my mom. And so she got to hear my mom, she got to hear her grandmother for the first time. She said, not only that, but I didn't realize that my mom had been a special ed teacher and one of the first special ed teachers in the state of Colorado. And I didn't know that, but my daughter actually is in college for special education. So to me, that's why I love oral histories, because here this granddaughter got to meet her grandmother and got to have brand new memories of a person she'd never met before. And the daughter gets to hear her mother for the first time in 20 years. They're building memories together even when someone's gone. And that's really, to me, the power of oral histories is that you doing these projects now are going to give multiple generations the opportunity to hear from each other and interact with each other in a way that they would not otherwise have been able to do. And creating these oral histories now, doing these oral histories, even if it's just a little project to start and you decide to do something a little bit bigger later on, they mean something to the community. They help build that community. So I feel very fortunate that I get to collect a lot of oral histories and interact with a lot of people doing that and build relationships with people doing that. So I hope you've enjoyed this workshop today. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm very happy to answer any and all questions that you have about oral histories.
Hi, I have a question.
Thank you, Rachel. And I would say probably just, you're welcome to unmute. Excellent.
I'm jumping right in. Rachel, first I want to thank you. This was an extremely helpful and very thorough presentation. We've talked about doing, I'm down here in Pagosa Springs, and I've talked to Gail before about how do we merge sort of historic preservation in our Main Street, and that's something I'm still working on. And we talked about doing oral histories before. Do you sense, one of the questions that we got from our collector, we had an identified collector at the time, one of the questions that we had was, do we anticipate people feeling uncomfortable about being asked for this sort of thing? I'm trying to think of how to invite those collectors to the conversation and to get them super, super comfortable so that when they go out and ask people, I think we're going to actually have to identify some people to come to the table. I think we're going to do a two-pronged approach. That's how I'm anticipating. Anyway, this is kind of a long question, but are there sort of reservations or hesitations, or is that something that we just want to include in our training?
So that's a great question. So with inviting people to donate or to share their stories, I again go with storytelling language. Share their stories, right? We've like. Would you like to formally donate an oral history to such and such project is very formal. I always go, we'd love for you to share your stories about Main Street, your memories, right? Using words that like invoke that excitement of, for some people, right? For some people. And so what you really want to do before you start inviting folks is you want to have your mission for what you're trying to do. Because when I contact people, we're the State Historical Society. So I contact people and I say, your story is really important to the state of Colorado. And we would love to have it in our collection so that people now and in the future have the benefit of hearing your contribution to the state. So you want to get kind of like big and mythological almost about the importance of their contribution to the project, because really what I have found is people tend to fall into 3 categories. Number one, they're not interested in doing it. No, thank you. I don't want to do it. And most of those people, they're not even going to respond. They're just not going to, they just won't respond to you. And if you do it in public, they'll say, or, you know, if you're doing it in person, they'll say, oh, no, thank you. I'm not interested in participating. No problem. The second group of people are the people that are real enthusiastic about doing it. And that second group, be prepared for a long storytelling very often, because they have lots of things to say. They're going to talk to you forever. And so again, like having those 1-hour intervals is useful, right? And then your third group are going to be the people who are like, no, my story's not important. So then those are the people you really want to hear from. Actually, I have found just in doing this a long time that those are the stories that are like the most compelling. And in that case, you got to do, if you really want their story, you have to do a little more research on them, normally ahead of time, if you can, and really know what specific part of their story is going to be of great importance to your project. Like last year I did an oral history with Pat Schroeder. Of course, she's going to do an oral history because she loves Colorado and she knows her story is important, right? But I also did an oral history with Albert DiNardo, who is a 94-year-old in Canyon City who has, since the age of 12, has been making cherry cider. And so it's not Colorado's oldest business, but it's the oldest one that is like the only owner, right? Like he's been the only owner of this business. It took me like 2 or 3 conversations with his assistant before, because he's very hard of hearing, and I met with him in person. So I talked to his assistant on the phone, who helps him run his shop. And it took several conversations with her before I was able to be like, no, like Albert's really important to the history of this state, and we really need his story. And I said, you know, like, I'm an agricultural historian. So for me to talk about why he's important agriculturally to the state, and the fact that like, we were used to be one of the #1 producers of cherries in the country, and we have a great fruit industry, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of building that story out as to like, I really need your story. And sometimes that takes a couple of conversations if it's somebody that you really want. Yeah, it's a great question.
I have a question, Margie from Trinidad. Our creative district is having Smithsonian Institute come to Trinidad late December into January. One of the things that we're adding, Trinidad is adding to the exhibit, is oral histories, story share through Blue Sage. It's all really new to me. It's all kind of just starting to transform and fall into place. But I would love if I could reach out to you with particular questions, especially because we're going to try to pull in an old timer who's had 6 generations, who homesteaded and still living here. We want to talk about Sopris and how a community got flooded for the dam. Agriculture is very important here. And then moving forward, kind of space it out in generations so that we get a full story timeline from the oldest to the youngest with history. And we're just kind of massaging it, trying to get it all in order, and getting committees and whatnot for help and setting these up. But can I reach out to you if I have questions, because it is a bit overwhelming and we're ground floor right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
I'll make
Thank
sure
you.
Tracy's got my information. When I'll send her the slides and the release form samples, and I'll send those as well. I mean, my email will be in there as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
This is Jeannie Caldwell with the town of Rangeley.
Hi.
A couple of things. We have a little podcast in town that a couple of us do, 2 girls, 1 small town. And what I realized is that we have had a couple of interviews on there with elderly people who are approaching 90. And we got a really good history on those. So we have published those. I'm going to publish one of them actually on our Main Street website. The others are published on the 2 Girls, One Small Town website. But how can I take those? And this is another interesting thing. Yesterday, we had a gentleman come into the office. We have a little newspaper thing that comes out every couple of months. And he wants to start writing history for this newsletter, Rangeley Review. So he was worried about his grammar and stuff, which I assured him that I could take care of that. But so how can I make that play into more of what we want the final outcome to be, I guess?
Sure. So, I mean, I think if you are, with your podcast, I mean, if you've got, you know, if you already did interviews with these folks, you know, that's a great place to start too. There's lots of different ways to do oral histories, in addition to, and that's a great one. I think with the newsletter, if he's wanting to do general history, that may be a little bit different than if he wants to do oral histories. If kind of combining an oral history project with his with his column is something that he's interested in, you're interested in, I think making sure that he's got the training that we talked about with the storytelling storytelling events, like everything that we talked about with the storytelling event can be done as kind of a one-off. Right, you don't have to do any of you still do your questions, you still do your paperwork and your narrator care and things like that, but it's just one at a time rather than at an event. And then he could take, you know, interesting and cool snippets out of the oral histories and put them into the newsletter column. So that might be an option. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's really making my brain work and think. Yes. So I was excited when you said a couple of things today. I thought, oh, I think I can make this happen like this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I have a dozen other questions.
No, please. I was going to say if there aren't any more questions, but Cindy.
I probably have a dozen more, but I'll limit it to one or two. Rachel, did you say that you have a resource that you can share out with us on some online collections so that I can get an idea of what these actually look like, what the finished products look like? I want to know where we're going with it, so we kind of have an idea of how we want to assemble these. And then is there a lot of, I know you said there isn't a lot of technology. Whew, I'm too old to do technology. So is there a lot of production work that has to go into putting these things into a presentable format for the public? Okay.
No, so I will also include the link to our SoundCloud. All of our oral histories are in our catalog, but everything that's digitized goes on SoundCloud. So we basically have a playlist on SoundCloud. It's very easy to use. It's basically drag and drop to create playlists on the SoundCloud. And so it's very user friendly. And that's our access point, because our catalog doesn't support the size of files that oral histories are. Like it would support a 2-minute clip, and most of our oral histories are over an hour. So we use SoundCloud as access, but they're stored on a server. As far as, let's see. What was your other, online collections? Production. No, almost none. So that's another thing I will send. I actually removed it from our talk today because I wanted to make sure I had time for questions. But with oral histories, we don't edit them. At least we don't edit them for content, because oral histories are that person's story. Now, the one thing I will do is if I'm doing individual oral histories where I'm doing, like, I sit down with someone for 2 hours. So this could be for the storytelling ones, or if you're just doing a single oral history. Very often I will send it to the person to listen to before I take it to committee, because once we accession something in our collection, we can't do anything we can't change it. And I'm a foot and mouth person occasionally, and I know other people are as well sometimes. And so I don't want to accession, say, Pat Schroeder's oral history if she accidentally said something she did not want to say, like, you know, for permanent record. There have been a couple of times where someone has said, can you, I had a student do an oral history with someone who was in a polygamous relationship, and she had mentioned the name of one of her partners, and the partner didn't want their name mentioned. So she asked us to redact that. And so we just went in and redacted it. And I will send you in resources, we use Audacity, which is a free open source audio editing software. It looks really difficult to use, but I made a really short little 5-minute video about how to remove background sound. And honestly, that's almost all I ever do. Unless someone specifically says, can you redact the name of somebody, which is basically just like a cut and paste the way that you would in text in Audacity. The only thing I ever edit is background sound, which is why we have that 1 to 3 minute or 1 to 2 second, not minute, 1 to 2 second clip at the beginning of our recording so that we can pick up the ambient background sound and tell Audacity, we want this particular sound removed from the whole thing. And Audacity is like, okay, done. And so I have a little 5-minute video of how to do background sound removal that I'll share as well. But that's all that, like, this is not podcast level production. We don't worry about having boom mics and, you know, big giant headphones, although they're kind of fun to wear sometimes. But we don't worry about any of that stuff. This is about the person's story. And that's what an oral history is their story recorded on something. So we don't tend to worry as much about the technology with oral history. Great question.
Well, now if there isn't anything else, I would like to thank you so much, Rachel. I just, I love that we were able to share this. I'm glad that we recorded it. So speaking of recording oral histories, to share with those folks who couldn't make it today. You know, I had a couple of questions about maybe trying to do this on a statewide level. It's one of the reasons why we introduced it today, is to hopefully get you all started on this in your communities, and maybe look at a way to pull it together or provide some additional assistance from the state level. I'd be happy to look into that some more, Jillian. It's certainly something that the website that I shared with Rachel was our Celebrating Main Streets story maps that were generated from our surveys over the past couple of years. I see this as a way that we could a place that we could house some of these stories that are collected, or, you know, and particularly maybe those short little snowball questions where it is just somebody has a comment about the, you know, the favorite store that was identified. I think it'd just be a fun way to give those pages some more depth. But once again, thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today. And I look forward to hearing the stories from all of your Main Streets. So thanks again, everyone. Have a fabulous day.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It was fantastic.
Thanks, everybody.